Talking.
Sorry, I was late. I lost.
Welcome everyone to Grail Country. We're here for our 20th installment of our Meditations on the Tarot series on letter 20, Judgment. And we should just jump right in. So the major theme, even though it's called Judgment, the major theme of the chapter is resurrection. And right before I hit the record button, we were kind of already engaging in a discussion about what Tomberg is doing here, because early on in the chapter, he quotes St. Paul in First Corinthians verse 1, First Corinthians chapter 1, verses 20 through 21, where he talks about essentially the announcement or proclamation through the folly of preaching. And then Tomberg goes through this long list of the history of Christian thought, and he's like, okay, after 19th centuries after St. Paul, are we still only able to approach resurrection through the folly of preaching? And I was saying that he seems to leave that question unanswered. And then Michael was suggesting that essentially the rest of this chapter amounts to a sermon from Tomberg. So he's actually demonstrating the folly of preaching in the chapter.
Well, he does say,
is that a fair?
He's demonstrating that it's not folly.
Okay,
and that's what he's saying. I mean, that's why he puts folly of preaching in quotes,
right?
We're indicating, because the rest of it, he's like, look. How can you say the resurrection is just a fairy tale when you have, what's all the things he lists? Right, he lists 19 centuries of effort and evolution in human, religious, philosophical, scientific, and hermetic thought. Lists a bunch of saints who also examined the history of resurrection. Gets to Bergson, Teilhard, and
right.
Jung, the masters of alchemy, and they're all about resurrection.
Yeah.
Right. And here we go. So let me drop this in here. See what that is? Ex Deo nascimur et Christo moriamur per spiritum sanctum reviviscumus, which is one of the Rosicrucian motto from the 17th century, which, believe it or not, Rudolf Steiner had a medallion made that he wore around his neck that had a cross and this inscribed. What it means, it said, in translated, it's from God we are born, in Christ we die, and through the Holy Spirit we are born again. Which is what this chapter is about, right? And that's the whole Rosicrucian project, at least the 17th century version. That's the project, and that's the idea. In fact, if you may have already noticed that on Regeneration we interviewed Martin Shaw yesterday.
Yes, I did. I started watching it. This morning immediately, and
I haven't watched it yet, Michael, but I saw it. I'm excited.
I got through about the first 30 minutes, and then my son came down and wanted to visit with me before we recorded this. So I didn't get a chance to finish it yet, but I'm definitely.
But where I was going is one of the things I read the first stanza of Henry Vaughan's poem Regeneration, and Henry Vaughan and his brother were Rosicrucian types. I don't know, right? Certainly part of that movement. And resurrection was the key word there, and that resurrection or regeneration also had to do with regenerating culture and the church. Of course, they failed. Well, let's put it, they didn't fail. It's just an ongoing project, right? And then Tomberg is picking that thread up here.
Transformation takes a while,
and that's what Steiner was doing. That's why Steiner had that placed around his neck. And by the way, this was a birthday gift, I think it was, to me from Therese Schroeder-Schieker.
Nice.
Oh.
I went to Vancouver Island to see Martin Shaw.
There's Latour he just did?
Yeah. That's
nice.
where I was and got to speak to him, and yeah.
And she's talking to him on Monday, and it will be on Grail Country.
Okay, here's the question though. The thing I really want to, is he taller than he looks or shorter than he looks?
No. He's just right.
He's about what, 5'9"?
I don't know. He was standing on the stairs I was down on the floor, so he looked a lot taller. But no, I
Where's it at? I was asking because I always thought Paul Vanderklay was short, and then I saw a picture of
Oh
Nate
no,
McMillan,
Paul
who's
is tall.
tall.
I'm 6'1", by the way. If you saw that
So he must
picture
be
on Twitter,
6'4", 6'5",
he's
huh?
6'4". Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he is
Okay.
6'4". I'm 6'1".
What
he's
about you?
6'4".
What about you, Michael? How tall are you?
I am 6 foot tall.
6
Oh,
foot even.
I'm only 5'4". Just a little short thing.
That's totally average height for a woman, Shari.
I know. I'm so
Not
average.
short. My wife is my wife is actually not quite 5 feet. She tells everybody she's 5 feet. She's actually like 4'11" and a half.
Oh my goodness, she's tiny.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, my all the women in my family are tall. I mean, my 2 daughters are almost 6 feet tall, and my wife's 5'9".
Yeah,
But my youngest daughter is 5'3" or 5'4".
oh, that's funny.
She's mad because she's like a shrimp compared to everybody else in the family.
Yeah,
I'm like, hey, listen, Kate Bush is your height.
Yeah.
the shortest of the Heil women is 5'7". So same thing in my family. It's like the ranges from like 5'7" to almost 6 feet.
We're all about the same height in my family, my siblings. Oh, except my brother Michael. He's 6 feet. 6 feet. Yeah.
Okay, it's because okay, that has lots to do with resurrection. But
Yeah, it's just like, yeah, we just
saying.
haven't, you know what? This is just, we haven't had a chance to talk for a while. So we just like, we're
know.
catching up.
It's nice.
It's nice.
called-
It's nice.
This
called communion.
episode
And
sponsored by Ritter.
everyone should watch Michael's conversation with Martin Shaw, because Martin Shaw is amazing.
And so is Michael.
And so is Michael. And you should all watch it. And then of course you should all watch Shari's conversation, which is, I'm not sure what day it's going to be on Real Country, but she's recording it on Monday. And I, for one, am looking forward to seeing it because I think it's going to be awesome.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes.
So
My man's.
let's talk about resurrection. So I just to kind of get us back into the conversation, there was a line, actually, I emailed Martin Shaw this morning because I was telling him that I saw that he was talking to you, and I was happy to see that. And then I just like mentioned a few other things, and I mentioned that I talked to Paul Kingsnorth recently because they're friends. And of course, the conversation that Shari and I had with Paul Kingsnorth was on the machine, and I couldn't help but for that made this little bit stand out. Tomberg says, and it's page 622 in my PDF, so I'm not sure what that is in the book. Hold on a second. I'm looking at the physical copy and to see. It's got to be. I'm not sure where it is in the book. It's a short line. I'll just read the line. I'm sorry, I can't tell you where it is in the book.
Okay, it's okay.
I didn't underline. I tend to make my notes in the PDF so I don't mess up my book. I'm that person. He says the resurrection body will have nothing mechanical, nothing automatic about it. So in some ways, like, resurrection is the absolute inverse and opposite of the machine.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing mechanical and nothing automatic about it. So it's the anti-machine.
That's right.
Okay, now, like, I read this like almost a month ago. I'm just looking at some of my notes in here, and
Yes.
because I'm the person who marks up the book.
That's fine. It's totally okay. It's
And
totally okay.
yeah, same here. And now I'm remembering he does a lot of he talks a lot about memory, and I wanted to mention this especially with Michael here because I was watching the panel discussion with John Vervaeke, Pajot, and Paul Vanderklay from Chino.
From Chino, okay.
And John Vervaeke described in cognitive science terms that memory functions more like a compost heap. Okay.
Right.
And my mind just took off when he said that, because I love compost. Like, compost to me is one of the most enchanted things out there, like it.
No shit, right?
It's
It's
definitely
no. It's people, all right.
It's totally
filter.
like a sacred space when I'm compost. Like, because I do every 3 days turn my compost. Right?
Do you really that often?
I do it every 3 days so I can get it on the garden in time. But anyway, because then it's fully composted within a month. And I learned my lesson because I didn't compost properly once, and I spread stuff on the field, and then I ended up with a bunch of unwanted plants in my pastures. So now anyway. What's interesting about compost is that you start out with bullshit. Okay. Like if you want to think about it in Verbekey's terms, you're right. You start out with bullshit, and it distills down to the pure, rich essence of itself. Okay. And so think about that in terms of the function of the memory. I think that's, I don't know if anybody's
no,
ever
that's
thought
actually
about it in those terms.
that's quite a good analogy in terms of then coming back into the way that Tomberg talks about it here.
And then it's also, let me just say this much, it's also used to add fertility. Okay, that's what it's for. It adds fertility. So I think you can totally think about memory in those terms.
Right. So I think to roll with your composting analogy and then to apply that analogy.
Verbekey
Right, I know.
called it that.
Right. I get it. But to then apply that analogy to the way Tomberg is talking about memory here in this chapter. He talks about, and he's talked about memory in this way before too, in some of the chapters we discussed earlier, but he kind of reiterates it and clarifies it a little bit. And so he talks about it in terms of the automatic memory, which is like more operational in our youth, right?
That would be like chemical fertilizers.
And then the logical memory, which we become more reliant on as we approach middle age. And then he talks about essentially the moral memory, which is like the highest, like the vertical memory. So when you describe memory as compost, what you're talking about is how those memories like layer up into each other and lead to fertility, which would be like the pinnacle of the moral memory.
Well, composting has stages of development, right? Like when you first start, you've got a lot of raw material that hasn't composted properly. Right. In the center, you've always got the most heat and the most activity, but on the outside, you've still got straw and manure and whatever, right? And the more you turn those things into each other and spread that good bacteria. See, this is the thing. Compost is a home. It's a home for millions of bacteria, millions of them. And so you just keep introducing them to each other. It's really all you're doing.
So this is what's interesting, because when
would you like to meet Frank?
The way Tomberg talks about the moral reasoning, he is very emphatic about the point that like nothing is too high or too low for to be a concern of the moral memory. That the moral memory that the moral memory is actually as concerned with the highest of the highest things as well as the lowest of the lowest things. Like there's nothing that it doesn't touch on. Why do you think he calls it moral memory? Like why does he use that?
That's a question for Michael.
Well, I've thought all about this a lot over the years, especially since once my mother was diagnosed with dementia, and the thing that affected it was her memory, right? And I've thought often while dealing with her, I thought of what Tomberg says about these different kinds of memory, and I couldn't figure out a way to place that other than we would have house church, and I'd go to give her communion, and she knew what to do, right? She didn't know the younger kids' names. In fact, the 4 kids who lived at home, I don't think she knew their names. And she was with us for almost 7 years, right? Or actually over 7 years. She most often got my name wrong. Regularly got my name but she knew who I was. I mean, but she just when it came out, she associated me with her twin brother and not with her oldest son. But she knew I was somebody who, she could trust, right?
Mm.
So I don't know if it's related to that, but um, what I do, where I would connect this idea of moral memory to one of my favorite films, and Nate knows this, Excalibur.
Mm.
Remember toward the end of Excalibur, after Merlin has been enchanted by Morgan, right? And they're about to have the Battle of Camlin, and there is Arthur. They actually filmed at Tintagel, which is where he was born. Right. And I visited there. It's a pretty magical place. And he's kind of praying, half talking to himself, and he says, "Merlin, I wish you were here." And he drops his hand on the rock and wakes Merlin up. And Merlin tells him, "You brought me back. Your love brought me back." To me, that seems like an image of moral memory.
Right. Well, because ultimately, that's exactly right. Because that's exactly right. He actually says that explicitly. He ultimately does, like later in the chapter, like he does link it directly to love.
It's also, he also talks about Lazarus, right? The recalling from the tomb, which is kind of, I think, indicative of that example.
Right. Because Jesus loved him, right? That's what it's
right. Because
so we read in scripture.
Love is what causes resurrection, is what he's saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And okay, so this is what I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about like the law that's written on our hearts, like the do not steal, the do not kill, the do not, the 10 commandments, essentially. The motivation for those things would also be love, right? Love for the other. Like you're not going to kill or lie or steal or cheat or take their wives because of love, right? That's the way that you love properly, is to not do those things. And so that seems like a moral law that doesn't have to be.
That's why Jesus reduces. That's why Jesus reduces the law to just like the summary of the law, right?
Yeah. Love the Lord and love your neighbor.
Yeah. So like he's like, that is the essence of that is the so when people hear about Tomberg when Tomberg is talking about moral memory, people should not be thinking about that in terms of like a moral code. What he's actually pointing toward is love when he's talking about moral memory. And this is how I think, Michael, this actually relates to how you were talking about your mother, right? Because that's what was left. It's like she may not have been able to remember the factual details.
The mechanical memory was shot, right?
Right. The automatic mechanical memory was shot. She couldn't remember the factual details, like what was at the and she was not as good as maybe she was in the middle of her life at using her logical memory to supplement the gradual failing of the automatic memory. But the moral memory remained intact, because she may not have remembered who you were, but she knew that you were a person that she loved, and she still felt connected to you.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the same experience I had. My grandfather also kind of had a slow descent into dementia before he passed, and he was always warm with family, and he delighted in small children, and would just light up. And he was very happy. He wasn't like he was on an Alzheimer's ward. And like there were a lot of grumpy people that were very unhappy on the ward that he was on, but my grandfather was not one of them. He was always joyful.
Nice.
So as hard as it was for his family, it's like he was still enjoying life and still had love for, well, the smallest and the highest things. And I think part of the reason that Tomberg says the smallest and the highest things is that the smallest things and the highest things often turn out to be the same thing, right? Mm-hmm. I think we can, like, I mean, there's a pretty good scriptural basis for thinking that.
Yeah,
like,
right. The first becoming last, and the last.
Right, exactly. The first will be last, and the last will be first. So it's like, that's how it is connected to the smallest things and the greatest things, because oftentimes the things that we think are smallest are actually greatest.
Mm-hmm.
So
Well, that's what George MacDonald says, that the reason that these theologians get their doctrines so mixed up is because they don't look low enough.
Right. Well, and
That's
also
right.
they think that they like it's something. I mean, there's like theology. It's like it can only get you so far, right? Like theology, when it's at its best, it's kind of like trying to point you
I think
in the right
theology at its
direction.
best is a story.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, I'm at the saturation point with theologians right now.
Yeah.
That-
After
because
I left.
it's just, especially academic theology. That's
Right.
why, what I love about Martin Shaw, for instance,
Mhm.
is he would never call himself a theologian, but his theology is in the wild, and there's
Right.
not enough wildness in theology right now. It's
Right.
academic, and it's a kind of scholasticism. It
Right.
continues to be, right? It's a
Right.
language of professionals, for professionals, by professionals, right? And this is what, even I think, one of the more important theologians of the last 100 years, von Balthasar,
Hmm.
he uh distinguished that, like, from theology at the desk from theology at prayer, right? And there's a big difference. And of course, a lot of the theologians I'm thinking of will use that definition of von Balthasar's, but in practice, it's theology at the
Well,
desk.
good theologians know the limitations of theology and will point beyond. Like, and I think the separation between theology and philosophy, I would say the same thing of philosophy, right? Like, neither theology nor philosophy is capable of completing itself on its own. There's
That's
no,
why I love
it can't create
Wittgenstein.
a
That's why I
perfect.
like
It has to
Wittgenstein so
gesture
much.
it has to gesture beyond itself, which is like, so I've been rereading some Catherine Pickstock lately, because I'm getting ready to have a conversation with John Vervaeke and Jordan Daniel Wood on Catherine Pickstock's thought. And like, I think her notion that liturgy completes philosophy is like entirely spot on. And you can see how this kind of like hooks up with like some of Vervaeke's own thought and some of what Ian McGilchrist is saying too, about like the inadequacy of like the left brain on its own, right? It can't like it's and the left brain making a poor master, because when these sorts of like mental tools are at their best, it's when they do in fact realize their own limitations and point beyond themselves. So that's why the idea that liturgy completes philosophy is precisely right.
Well, this is why Rudolf Steiner, for instance, when people would do anthroposophical jobs, he'd say, okay, well, 3 years of the intellectual stuff, okay, whatever, but it should be followed by 3 years of practical, like farming or the arts or whatever it happens to be. And I think what often happens, and I've seen this over and over again with intellectuals, is they just become detached heads. They're not connected to the flesh.
No.
And I think this is one of the things he gets to in here. I mean, it's really about the resurrection of the body.
Right.
Right. Memory is a kind of resurrection, but the real,
we want to talk about how
here is the resurrection of the body,
yes.
Which, believe it or not, I'm not sure most Christians even believe in.
Right, because they're not Gnostic by nature.
Earth is not our home, and we're really spiritual beings. We get that.
But Tomberg is thinking about the body in a very interesting way that would challenge both the, I would say, the it would challenge any kind of dualism for sure, and any kind of Gnosticism, but it also like challenges the way that people that are that are overly literal in their thinking about the body, and overly materialistic too. Both at the same time, because Tomberg basically says that the will is what generates the body.
So there's this idea, and McGilchrist introduced me to this wonderful idea of distinction without division. And I've been thinking about this because um, um, recently talked about it. We talk about the church and we talk about the body of Christ as two distinct things, and I think we make the big error of actually dividing them from each other, but they're not divided. Okay. And when you and I realized in thinking this through, this is why I have my body question. This is why God has constantly poked me about this. You can't stop thinking about this. You got to think about what's your body for, because what my body is for is what the church is for. And then the bigger question is, what is the church? If the church is the body of Christ, what was Christ's body? Okay, like this goes, into all different, and then the question that flitted past me the other day driving back, and I'm like, wait, come back, was what happened to Christ's body, right? So it was transfigured, it was crucified, and it was resurrected. And Michael, I'm ashamed to say that I have all your books and I still haven't read them because my hands are always busy and I never have time to hold a book. So, but
My wife hasn't read it either.
I got to talk to
They're
Michael
dedicated to her. But
because, and I know this is totally off topic here, but I just want to get it out because I think it's so interesting, because I was thinking of the uncreated light. The uncreated light is what transfiguration is. And then I thought about mysticism, gnosis, and sacred magic, right? And this psychological journey that one must take in order to be the magician who holds things at the tips of his fingers. This is my burden is light and my yoke is easy. Okay, that's exactly what that is. And so there has to be, like I talked to Jess about this briefly, there has to be a psychological, like there is a submerged reality. I'm stealing all Michael's titles.
at least you got that far. Yeah.
because there's a psychological journey of metanoia that has to happen, right? Which illumines, right? Which is then what transfigures you. And but what happens after the transfiguration? Yeah. And
Well,
so anyway, I could go on and on. I haven't thought it all through, but because I have had this body question thing going on forever in my mind about my own body. Like, why do I have such a fragile, pierceable, pain-ridden, vulnerable body, right? And then now it's morphing into this. Okay, well, what happened to Christ's body, and what is Christ's body? But anyway, that's.
Well, I think you're pointing to the essential question, our times. I mean, this is what we see with, people who actually believe they were born in the wrong body.
I know.
Right. And it's not just like a couple of random people. It's kind of widespread. It's become a kind of a thing, right? A kind of a fad or something.
Right.
But the notion that informs it, where does this come from?
It's Gnostic. Like, or well,
I
don't know. That maybe that's a generalization. Well, it's a detachment from the mother, in my opinion. I'll just say that.
Well, that's where I was going. That's where, when you brought up the submerged reality, that's where I wanted to direct you as to what Tomberg says about Mary in this chapter, where he says that she is virgin nature, virgin soul, and virgin spirit.
Right.
So, and that Mary is not resurrected. She's assumed. Right. Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And that is because she is
has everything
nature, virgins. Like she has no need for being resurrected.
Because she's Sophia.
Right. She already is life. She is mother.
And for all you people who want to, heretic colonists, bring it. Okay. I'm ready. Let's go. Come at me, bro.
Well, there's that, there's do you remember that scene? Remember that scene in the Song of Bernadette where like the priest freaks out because like Mary has said like I am the Immaculate Conception,
Right.
like that's her identity, and
Gotta
that
love
would
it.
and the priest says that would be tantamount to saying I am mother, I am life. I'm like, yep, that's right. I am mother, I am life.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's one of the things we talked about with the Shaw yesterday. Is Mike and I have been talking about before. With the renewal throughout history, the renewal of the church never came from the theologians.
Right.
Came from the peasantry. Came from Bernadette.
Because you're
Right.
closest to the earth.
That's right.
And Mary is church too. Like that's the thing. It's like Mary is the like. Yes, we're the body of Christ, but where does the flesh and blood and body of Christ come from?
That's
From
right.
his Virgin Mother.
And if you want to get, I've read this. I think you've ever read this book? It's a really cool book called The Virgin by, what's his name? Jeffrey Ash, is that his name?
Oh, Jeffrey Ash. Oh, I know the author, but I haven't read that book.
That's an awesome book. It is one of the best books I've ever read on Mary.
I like
And
Jeffrey Ash a lot. He's like, he's written a lot on like, historical King Arthur and some of like the origins of like ancient, like Proto-Indo-European myth and stuff like that. He's great.
But his book on the Virgin is mind-blowing if you can get it.
Oh, I will have to read that because I love Jeffrey Ash already.
25 or 30 years ago.
Okay.
It's so good. So good. And that's one of the places in there. I think he's the one that says this, that if we're going to take things scientifically, because Jesus was born of a virgin, they would be essentially identical twins genetically.
Right.
Or not identical, but fraternal twins.
Fraternal twins genetically,
Yeah.
Because it's like his
chew on that for a second, okay?
Right. His bodily human nature comes entirely from his mother.
Well, this is the interesting thing for me, because if Christ is born in us, then he's also born of a virgin. There, and this and this gets to the whole, for me anyway, because of the book of Job, this gets to the whole question of what is actual righteousness, and I think it's virginity, right? It's this virginal aspect of who you are, like the white stone name, if you want to call it that. And that is where Christ, that's where Christ is born, right? And that's why all the imagery with the virgin and Christ within the womb, right? Like it's so fractal that it's never ending, you're just, and then
that's where the fathers got it wrong. I'm sorry, Ortho Bros. That's where the fathers got it wrong by taking that literally, the virgin aspect, because then we need to be virgins too, right? But it was not until Jakob Burma, the modern father of Sophiology, who issued a corrective about that, saying the virginity is something. It's a state of soul. It's not a state of your biological apparatus, right? It's not a biological state, even though there is a biological state called that. But it's the real thing. Now, isn't it interesting too? When men are virgins and when they're no longer virgins, their bodies have not changed.
Mm-hmm.
But not so with women, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's important to think about. I mean, and so virginity is par excellence then an icon of the feminine. But I don't mean that women should be virgins if they want to be totally women. I think it means the virginity of the soul and of the spirit, which can be. Oh, that's what Burma calls it, the kiss of Sophia, right? You regain that virginal state.
I think it has to do, Michael, tell me if I'm wrong, but I think Tomberg talks a lot here in this chapter. He'll contrast like the horizontal like movement of
Right.
heredity versus like the vertical elements of like true individuation, which begins to unite the will with God. And so I think like that is the virginal. Like
Right.
that is the virginal. It's like it escapes. This is
Right.
and this is why it makes sense to think about Mary being born without original sin. She's not, because she is not within the frame of heredity. Like she is virgin nature, virgin soul, and virgin spirit. She's entirely like beyond the that horizontal in her nature. And so this is what it means to be a virgin, is that so we all have the potential to have that restored within us.
Yes.
Can I read you guys something? I read this to my friend the other day. I couldn't get through it without crying, so I might, but just ignore me. I really, when I was reading it, I was thinking about you, Michael. I don't know if you've ever read A Hidden Life by George MacDonald, but in the story, he meets a girl in the beginning, and she falls off her horse, and he saves her, and he's just struck by her beauty, but he never has a relationship with her. He never sees her again. But he describes that encounter as her throwing open the doors of enchantment to the whole world. Yeah. Suddenly everything changes. Okay. And then he gets tuberculosis and he's dying, and he writes her this letter. Okay. Never met her since.
Mm-hmm.
Lady, I owe thee much. Stay not to look upon my name. I write it, but I date from the churchyard. So he's already dead when she gets the letter. Thou knowest me not at all, nor dared I write, but death is crowning me thy equal. If my boldness yet offend, low pure in my intent, I am with the ghosts. When thou comest, thou hast already known, God equal makes up first, and death at last. But pardon, lady, before I had begun, my thoughts moved towards thee with a gentle flow that bore a depth of waters. When I took my pen to write, they rushed into a gulf precipitate and foamy. Can it be that death, who humbles all, has made me proud? Lady, thy loveliness has walked my brain, as if I were thy heritage bequeathed from many sires. Yet only from afar I have worshipped thee, content to know the vision had lifted me above myself, who saw and taken my angel nigh thee in thy heaven. Thy beauty, lady, hath overflowed and made another being beautiful, with virtue to aspire and be itself. Afar as angels or the sainted dead, yet near as loveliness can haunt a man. Thy form hath put on each revealing dress of circumstance and history, high or low, in which from any tale of selfless life, essential womanhood has shone on me. This is where it gets hard to read. 10 years have passed away since the first time, which was the last I saw you. What have these made or unmade in thee? I ask myself. Oh, lovely in my memory art thou. Are you as lovely in yourself? Your glory, then, was what God made you. Are you such indeed? Forgive my boldness, lady, I am dead. The dead may cry, their voices are so small. I have a prayer to make thee hear the dead. Lady, for God's sake, be as beautiful as that white form that dwells in my heart. Yea, better still, as that pure ideal that wakes in thee when thou prayest to God, or helpest thy poor neighbor. For myself I pray, for if I die and find that she, my woman glory, lives in common air, is not so very radiant after all, my sad face will afflict the calm-eyed ghosts, unused to see such rooted sorrow there. With palm to palm, my kneeling ghost implores thee, living lady, justify my faith in womanhood's white-handed nobleness, and thee its revelation unto me. But I bethink me, if thou turn thy thoughts upon thyself, even for that great sake of purity and conscious whiteness' self, thou wilt but half succeed. The other half is to forget the former, yea, thyself, quenching thy moonlight in the blaze of day, turning thy being full unto God, be thou in him a pure twice holy child, doing the right with the sweet unconsciousness, having God in thee, thy completing soul. Lady, I die. The Father holds me up. It is not much to thee that I should die. It may be much to know he holds me up. I thank thee, Lady, for the gentle look which crowned me from thine eyes 10 years ago. Before, clothed in nimbus of the setting sun, thee from my dazzled eyes thy horse did bear, proud of his burden. My dull tongue was mute. I was a fool before thee, but my silence was the sole homage possible to me then. That now I speak, and fear not, is thy gift. The same sweet look be possible to thee, and forevermore. I bless thee with thine own, and say farewell, and go into my grave. No, to the sapphire heaven of all my hopes. You know, he actually implores her, or wants her to aspire to the thing that God made her, this essential womanhood, right? That threw open the doors of the world for him. I don't know. I just, it just kills me whenever I read,
Well,
read that.
no, I
Okay,
think
so
you're-
let me see if this works with you, Sherry. So what listening to what you just read, what I want to relate that to, that's a concept that Tomberg talks about in this chapter, where he talks about that how the moral memory, love,
Uh,
will ensure that anything that is of eternal value is not lost.
mm,
So that's that's his faith, I think. Like it's like he has faith that even though nothing came of it in this life, that was of eternal value,
mm-hmm.
and will therefore not be lost.
Well,
well,
he experienced, I'm sorry, Michael, go ahead.
no, I mean what you're describing. I mean, in other terms, I mean this is everybody experiences this, right?
Uh-huh.
That's the call of Sophia. I mean, it
Right,
could be through
that's it.
seeing a girl for a young
Uh-huh.
man, girl. I mean, something, a revelation of beauty or of truth or something that is bigger than the thing you're looking at, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And I'm gonna. Do you mind if I bust out some prose poetry right here
Do it.
No.
from
Go for
Czesław
it.
Miłosz? Do you guys know him?
Yes.
I've heard the
Polish
name.
poet. I think he's one of the greatest poets of the 20th century. But his poem Essa, which is Latin for is or to be,
Yeah.
touches exactly on the same thing you described from George MacDonald. And it's not that long, so I'll just read it. I looked at that face, dumbfounded. The lights of metro stations flew by. I didn't notice them. What can be done if our sight lacks absolute power to devour objects ecstatically in an instant, leaving nothing more than the void of an ideal form, a sign like a hieroglyph simplified from the drawing of an animal or bird? A slightly snub nose, a high brow with sleekly brushed back hair, the line of the chin. Why is it the power of sight absolute? And a whiteness tinged with pink, two sculpted holes containing a dark, lustrous lava. To absorb that face, but to have it simultaneously against the background of all spring boughs, walls, waves, and its weeping, its laughter, moving it back 15 years or ahead 30, to have is not even a desire. Like a butterfly, a fish, the stem of a plant, only more mysterious. And so it befell me that after so many attempts at naming the world, I am able only to repeat, harping on one string, the highest, the unique avowal beyond which no power can attain. I am. She is. Shout, blow the trumpets, make thousand strong marches, leap, rend your clothing, repeating only is.
Mm-hmm.
She got out at Raspail. I was left behind with the immensity of existing things. A sponge suffering because it cannot saturate itself. A river suffering because reflections of clouds and trees are not clouds and trees.
Yeah, when you're reading that, I wanted to say God sees things as they are. This is one of the This is one of the main things that MacDonald pushes, right? And it's not, it's not he sees them as depraved and defiled and sinful. He sees she is, I am, he is, right? It's all that.
Mhm.
And that's precisely what MacDonald is saying here, or this young man is writing to her. I see you. I hope you see you.
Right.
Right. And in the end, at the end of the poem, months later, some little boy with his cow sees this woman in a churchyard weeping, right? And she has this letter in her hand. And we don't know what happened to her life. He doesn't know. And every now and then in the poem, he thinks about her, and he thinks, oh, has she gone down that road? Oh, I can't think about it because she has this sacred place, and she made the whole world sacred to him, right?
And I would say, to go back to our theme, both of those literary examples are examples of resurrection.
Yes. Yes. That's
They're
beautiful.
bringing to life, right? They're bringing the dead to life.
Right. That's right.
That's
Yeah.
wow,
It's
wonderful.
interesting. Tomberg is interesting though, because he says that he calls resurrection a synthesis of life and death. And he talks about the weirdnesses of the, so he's
The
like,
resurrection
instead of
body.
like, those people that will insist on like the literal physicality of the resurrection and just like kind of want to ignore all the weirdnesses about it, because it's the way that the actual resurrection body of Jesus is described is very, very, very strange. It's not like you're talking about just like an animated corpse, right? So, and Tomberg kind of like gets into some of that weirdness, and he says that resurrection is a synthesis between life and death.
Well, it has to be, Nate, because Jesus puts on the corruptible. Okay.
Mhm.
It's literally death. The body before the resurrection is death. It is
Right.
this body of death. Okay. And it is assimilated into life. It reminds me of the Valley of Dry Bones. I've always had this sense that the Valley of Dry Bones is like a backwards, when you rewind a video or whatever and everything goes backwards. It's like that. It's like creation backwards, right? You start out with the death, the skeleton, and then it goes to the tendons and the muscle and the veins and and it's all backwards, right? And it like Jesus says, let the dead bury the dead, right? Everything before the resurrection is dead. It's death. And it is only in putting on that Christ can trample death. It is by this death that he tramples death. Okay?
Mhm.
Literally. Like that is literal. you know. This is why the body thing is so interesting to me. Like it's just
Right.
it's
Let me just-
mushrooming.
If I can find the hold on a second.
And let me just throw this in here,
for
my
it.
favorite verse, that God's strength is made perfect in weakness, right? Weakness,
Right.
which is your body. It's literally is your body.
I can't find it.
What are you
But I
looking
was trying to find that section where he like talks about like the resurrection body, because he says some interesting things. Like, for example, he suggests that the reason that he's sometimes not recognized, or that he's not recognized until after something happens, like, right, he's not immediately recognized,
Hmm.
is because that he doesn't appear, he appears as no particular age. So
Uh-huh.
that he sometimes he's not appearing always as the 30 to 33-year-old man that they knew, but
Okay.
sometimes he
I got the
appears as
page for you.
younger or older. Yeah, okay, good.
Page 577.
577. Okay. You want to go ahead
Right
and read
there.
it if you found it?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, cool.
So
'Cause
thus
that's
the resurrection body will have nothing mechanical, nothing automatic about it. In no way will it be an assembly of implements prefabricated once and for all for the use of the will. And I think that's what we see, in a way, what we see right now is that this isn't really my real body. I mean,
Yeah.
is this? It's not a spiritual solution. It's a mechanical one. It's
Right.
ass backwards.
right,
Yeah.
right.
Right? In other words, it will not have ever. No, the resurrection body will be absolutely mobile and will create for each action the organ which suits it. At one time, it will be radiant light, such as Paul
Yes.
on the way to Damascus.
Yeah, this
But
is this. Yeah, precisely. Because this is interesting. This is actually the most interesting discussion of the variability of the resurrection body of Christ that I've heard.
Mhm. And another time, it will be a current of warmth, or a breath of vivifying freshness, or a luminous human form, or a human form in the flesh. For the resurrection body will be magical will, contracting and expanding. It will be, we repeat, the synthesis of life and death, capable of acting here below as a living person at the same time, enjoying freedom from terrestrial links like a deceased person. And what he means by dead here is not inert and vanished. He means
Right.
the existence of the dead, right?
Right.
Yeah.
A
Yeah.
spiritual form, right? And a little bit lower, he says, Hermeticism advances the thesis that the body is essentially as immortal as the soul and spirit, that immortality is threefold, and that the whole human being is essentially immortal. Right? This is important. And this is Hermeticism. And what he means by Hermeticism is basically that 17th century Rosicrucianism I was talking about, which is that's what it is. And that's what he and Steiner and Goethe are all coming out of. German idealism are all coming out of that epistemological position of what reality is.
Right.
In fact, I have this at the bottom of the page. According to Hermeticism, the essence of the body is not the matter of which it is composed, nor the energy which is produced in it, but rather the fundamental will.
That's what I was saying earlier. Yeah, that's the passage I was referencing earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah, where will is actually like essentially, I think he seems to be suggesting that that the will shapes the body, which is kind of what the people that you were just talking about are trying to do, but they're trying to do it in a materialistic, mechanical way. So it's not like they're wrong. It's the idea that the will shapes the body isn't wrong. It's just that they're going about it mechanically.
Well, here's an interesting. Now, last weekend, I taught a biodynamic farming and gardening course here. And I had a lot of people. You would have loved it. When I was milking the cow in the evening, people stuck around and they were chanting Compline while I was milking the cow. It was the coolest thing ever.
Beautiful.
But one of the things I read to them, which is from the agriculture course by Rudolf Steiner. Do I have it here? It's someplace in here. It is right here. Now, what happened was Aaron Fried Pfeiffer, who was kind of like a disciple of Rudolf Steiner's, who really got the biodynamics thing going, especially in the United States. He went to Dr. Steiner and he said, "Dude, you're giving these people all these great teachings and all this insight, but they're a mess. What's the problem? They can't do anything." This is my complaint about it. People just do something.
Yeah.
Like, quit talking, just do something. And here's what Steiner said. Check this out. This is 1924. He said, "This is a problem of nutrition. Nutrition as it is today does not supply the strength necessary for manifesting the spirit in physical life.
Mhm.
A bridge can no longer be built from thinking to will and action. Food plants no longer contain the forces people need for this." Right? And I think what I see all around me in the world is precisely this, not just we are talking about intellectuals who can't bring it into the will. Can talk all day. They can come up with fancy concepts and descriptions, right? And impress you with their intellectual dexterity, but they can't do anything with it, right? You can't put it into practical practice. But I think the same thing you were talking about, Nate, with the will, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think this is interesting thing because he's talking about the resurrection of the body, right? And the soul, the spirit, and the body. But it's interesting that in our time, that the body, our bodies in the West in particular, are so poisoned, so afflicted,
Malnourished.
malnourished, that it does not. And I think this is true. I think it's got to be 100 times worse now than it was in 1924.
Oh yeah.
Right? That if foodstuffs do no longer supply the nutrition capable of manifesting the spiritual and the physical, it can only be worse now. So it's interesting. It's like an attack on, and I think we see this right now. I think the demonic forces are attacking the most physical thing there is, which is the woman, right? And all its and all that fertility and beauty. And I don't know if you saw this. Spencer Clavin, right?
Yeah.
His father Andrew. I just saw a thing he did yesterday. I think I reposted it on Twitter, where he's talking about this
I just want to let her know really quick on Spencer Clavin. Just want to let the audience know Spencer Clavin is going to be one of the featured speakers along with Michael at a conference that's going on in Washington D.C. in July. If you have if you're able to go, you should go. You should go see Michael.
That's right.
Go see Spencer and Paul, of course. But go ahead and continue. I just wanted to plug the conference you have.
Thank you for plugging that. Yeah. I got a story about Spencer too. I'll be able to tell you. But anyway, Andrew was talking about precisely this, about, we're getting to the point where women are, as far as our culture is concerned, are superfluous, because men are able to be women now and beat women at their own game, and pretty soon we'll have.
Except for they're not really superfluous, because without them we die.
Well, get this. This is the next thing he said, and now we have the potential and the capacity for synthetic wombs. So who needs women, right?
Synthetic surrogacy.
And it's a cultural decline, which is he was talking about. So if you can find it, look for it. Andrew Clavin just came out a couple of days ago.
Yeah.
Pretty stirring, and I think he's right on the money. And I've been seeing this, and I've been yelling about this for years, right? But the anti that is Sophia, right? Which is the resurrection of that Tomberg is talking about here. And notice how, like in chapter 19 or letter 19 on the sun, he brings out all the sophiological big guns, and he continues it here.
He reinforces it here when
absolutely,
when in the way he talks about Mary, and So I totally agree with you about the food thing for sure, 100%. I've even noticed it in my lifetime. Like, it's just getting progressively worse. Like, bananas do not taste the same as they did when I was a kid. Like, they're not the same thing at all. They're like some kind of mutant.
All this GMO bullshit.
Right? Yeah, exactly. So this is definitely true. And I used to be a chef and I'm a foodie, so I taste the difference. It's there, it's real. But the thing that you said was, when you were talking about this resonated with me, because this is something I've been thinking a lot about lately. You were talking about basically, like academics and like talking all day and that kind of thing. And I have a question, and then I want to make an observation. The question I have is, what does our will truly desire? Is the question, but I want to leave that hanging for now, and just keep that question in the back of your mind. And then I wanted to relate this anecdote. When I was at the conference in Chino, like at the end of the first night, I came across this young man. His name badge said Micah, but he said, "Call me Herman." I said, "Okay, Herman." And he told me that he watched some Grail Country and he appreciated our channel, all that kind of thing. And then he asked me this really profound question. He says, it seems like we're almost running out of words to talk about this stuff. What do we do when we run out of words? And I said to him, I'm so glad you asked this question, because this idea, like I've been reading Pickstock lately, so I've been thinking about her idea about how liturgy completes philosophy. And then I've also started reading Ted Gioia's Substack, where he talks about how the origins of Western philosophy are in music. And so and so I'm thinking about this, about how like these things need to point beyond themselves. They need to be consummated in something that is not just that is more than just words. When I posted on when I tweeted out Joya's Substack, I asked the question, like, is it possible that the new song is actually a song, the new song in Revelation chapter 14? And I shared that thought with Yosef on our little Voxer group too, our Orthodox Jewish friend. And Yosef was like, he immediately jumped on that and said yes, which is interesting from him. And he talked about the songs in the Passover liturgy, and he thought that was very much right. And I was thinking about how the oldest liturgies that we have are sung liturgy. So all these, like, this young man's like question, like, I'm making all these connections. So then at the conference, at the very end of the conference, when they're having the last discussion on stage, and Vervaeke says, I feel like I'm out of words. And I just yell out from the audience, sing.
Did he?
No, he didn't. But there was
Oh.
that's kind of a chuck. He did not. But I'm going to be talking to him here in sometime later in June, and maybe we'll talk about that then. But it's like, and then okay, so now I want to go. Now that seems like a weird build-up to my question, but I actually think it's really directly connected to the question. It's like, what is in fact the deepest desire of our will, and how do we express it?
I got it. I know the
Okay.
answer.
Okay, answer it for me then, Shari.
The will desires to explore its limitations. That's what it does. That's what it wants to do in a Goethean way. So this was the example I used in our conversation with James, Nate, where Goethe spends time and he spends the time necessary exploring the boundaries of the plant, right? Following the lines, the limitations of the plant. And in so doing, he discovers that the leaf becomes the flower. And so this gets back to that thing that Michael was talking about he is and she is. These are the things that are, right? And in order to find the deeper profundity within them, or for them to be actually fertile to your soul, you have to use your imagination, which seeks out the works of God, right? And to clothe the plant with a clown suit and put a nose on it, and that is a complete lack of imagination. To not explore the limits and the boundaries of the thing that is in such a way that it reveals the absolute miraculous to you. And that's what the will wants to do. And I can say this with full confidence, because when I put my sheep in a new pasture, you know what they do? They walk the fence line. That's what they do.
Go to the perimeter, yeah.
They want to see, they seek out their limitation. They need to know where they are.
Mm-hmm. That's what there was a study done with kids on a playground, and they had playgrounds without fences and playgrounds with. On the playgrounds without a fence, the kids all congregated in the middle and stuck close to each other. When they had a fence, the kids were all at the edge of the fence.
Yeah, because that's
my answer.
Yeah.
Now,
okay.
you mentioned music. Now,
okay, you're gonna give us a musical answer.
Now, I'm just gonna ask you, can you hear that already?
Yeah.
Okay,
You're
I want to play something. I just want you to tell me. I'm not gonna sing. What does it feel like? What does it feel like?
You want to answer first, Shari?
Well, it feels like water. It feels like sunshine on the tops of the waves. It feels like wind in the grass. And it feels like feet traveling on a
That's what
on
I was gonna.
path.
That's interesting. So that what I actually was picturing in my head was like that, like someone on a journey, like that, like so that that last observation of yours, um, kind of ties up with what I with was is that this is like someone who's like
But my first
purpose, but with purpose though. Like it's a purposeful. It's not an aimless wandering. It's a purposeful journey.
But isn't that interesting how, I do this kinds of experiments with students in college, like, and I'll say, how is it you can do that without words telling you what to feel?
yeah.
Right.
Well,
So that's what happens when you run out of philosophy and
Right.
theology, right? I mean, yeah, I could talk, but there's something that, and I think touches on the super sensible.
mhm.
Uh, it touches on a spiritual component of us for
Well,
certain.
yeah. It also like it also ties up with like Barfield's ideas about participation too, because like particularly thinking about it in terms of like Joya writing about how like actually Western philosophy like comes out of the Greek hexameter verse and music, and then becomes like what it becomes after that, right?
Right.
And so and the development of philosophy is directly connected to the emergence of the withdrawal participation. Like at the dawn of Greek philosophy, like we're still within the age of original participation. We're just at the beginning stages of the beginning of the withdrawal participation at that point in history. So, but because the move there's no pathway back to original participation, even though it never entirely goes away.
Right.
And we have to re-enter into it with intentionality. I kept like Pajot at the conference. It's interesting because I don't really hear him talk about Barfield much, but the way he was talking about the symbolic world lined
He
up
wouldn't
with
dare.
Barfield. What was that?
He wouldn't dare.
The
Yeah.
the way he talked about the symbolic world lined up with Barfield so
Yeah.
much, because he actually said, just as Barfield says about participation, that it never entirely goes away. Pajot said at one point, like, the symbolic world never goes away.
Well,
Yeah, but
And
remember,
then
don't
he
you think
also talked about the need after modernity, the withdrawal participation, to re-enter back into the symbolic world with intentionality, which
okay,
is
so
precisely Barfield's point about
we
spinal
were,
participation.
you'll remember, Nate. Remember we talked to Vervaeke together, and he was talking about Jonathan. He says, "I don't think he's as orthodox as he thinks he is."
Well,
so
but orthodoxy. Here's the thing, though. Orthodoxy is because orthodoxy is wise enough to not allow theology too much reign, right? To not allow to just like, okay, we have the creeds and we have the seven early church councils, and to not blow itself up too much, and to try to allow the systematizers
Yeah,
more leeway than they ought to
yeah.
have in
They
terms of
avoided
defining what the
decision
thing is.
scholasticism.
You
Yeah.
actually can't, like, you actually can be entirely orthodox,
and be
in
and be
a sort of radical way. I would
You
say, even
can.
though he's not an Anglican, I would say that there's something about Pajot that is radically orthodox in the way that the radical Orthodox folks are
so what I
radical
wanted
in the
to
terms of to the
I
in terms
agree.
of the
I
connection to
agree.
root. Yeah.
But I think he gets. I think he gets freaked out and it goes back into the Orthodox circle. Okay. Talk
Yeah,
my
I know. Yeah.
father about this. He said it's okay, but I
Yeah.
was because he goes there. He gets to the edge. That's what Vervaeke was talking about. He gets to the edges of propriety, and then he backs off. But he's. I think we'll see what happens as he gets older. Um,
um
He's yeah,
but
about
he's
going back to that little interlude I played. Now, just it's trivia. That's actually a bridge I wrote for the English hymn "Jerusalem" by William Blake.
oh
okay.
wow,
So it comes
nice.
with two verses. But it just what is it that I mean that's so in a way. I mean, if we just look at that, I mean, it's not just this, but any kind of purely instrumental music, right? It somehow conjures meaning within us.
Michael, now that I know it's a bridge for Jerusalem, the fact that Shari actually pictured feet, it's really,
and did those
without
feet
having
walk
access to the
upon-
lyrics, is kind of interesting.
walk upon England's mountains green.
Yeah.
What I wanted to say about original participation and final participation, Nate, is that's exactly what Tomberg's description of the resurrection is the integration of death into life. Because original participation would be the dead burying the dead, right? Like that they are dead, right? In the sense that they're not filled full.
Yeah, I was actually writing about I was writing to like someone had asked me on the Discord server. Oh, it was Sam Glenn had asked me on the Discord server whether I agree with Ronner's claim that the Christian of the future will be mystic or not at all. And I just said flatly yes. And then Dave followed up and was saying, well, hasn't Christianity always been mystic? And then I'll actually just read what I said back to Dave. I said yes, but then I qualified it a bit. So yes, and this is the same reason why liturgy completes philosophy, because it points beyond itself and is insufficient on its own. Not bad, not worthless, but incomplete. I would say to Ronner's point, though, that the withdrawal participation requires a more intentional kind of mysticism than in the past. Pajot sounded very Barfieldian if you swapped out the symbolic world for participation at the Chino conference. For example, he said the symbolic world never goes away, just as Barfield said of original participation. But he was emphatic that we now have to be intentional about these things, which sounds very much like final participation. So we can also understand Ronner's point in light of Barfield. Because we cannot go back to original participation, but it never withdraws from us completely. The only door open to it is through the withdrawal of participation. You can read this as modernity, toward an intentional final participation. I would say this is far better than the original participation because of the element of intentionality. This is connected to the difference between the given and the gift. So, and that last point is why I wanted to talk about like the difference with original participation. It was just like the waters we swam in. It really had more of the aspect of the given than gift, because it was just the way things were. Because we now have to enter back into participation with intentionality, we can now begin to see the given as truly gift. Because
which means you have to live in gratitude.
Bingo. Exactly.
And that gratitude is what cultivates in you courage and humility. And those are the two things that Christ shows us when he goes to the cross.
Yeah. Courage
and humility, because he lives in gratitude, right?
Yeah.
And John Bear says Christ shows us what it is to be God in the way that he dies as a human being. And I've always seen God in that way, as courageous and humble, because he is completely misunderstood, and yet he continues, right, in a singular manner to love unto purity.
Well, that's the thing, Shari, is like love. If you really think about it, love, if it's really love, can't be other than courageous or humble.
Right. It's those two things. And and they're cultivated by living in gratitude. If you realize that nothing that you have is your own,
right,
that it's all a gift, right? Then
that's what Tomberg says right here on page 585. Resurrection is the magical operation, divine and human at the same time, in which divine love and human love overcome forgetfulness, sleep, and death. For love never forgets. It is always vigilant, and it is stronger than death.
I just wanted to make a point about gift, though. It's like there's like, and this ties back to the idea of intentionality, the way I was talking in that message back to Dave. It's so when you give someone a gift, their receipt of the gift is not an entirely passive action, because if you give someone a gift and they receive it only with passivity, then it actually turns the gift into something given without it being a gift. There has to be like when there's a proper mode in which to receive a gift. And then when you receive a gift in a proper mode, you end up keeping the economy of gift, which is ultimately what the divine economy is, going. You follow what I'm saying, Shari?
I caught the tail end of it. My sheep just explored their limitations and got out.
Because you talked about them, yeah.
Do you
I
need,
know.
do you need,
Put
to,
the
do you
fence
need to
up,
go
will
to
ya?
deal with your sheep?
I got to go out there and find them. They all headed back to the lake, but it's okay.
That's
Actually,
I think that idea of the gift can be something that we can end on today. Thank you for joining me for. I think the only thing we didn't talk about, if you just want, before we just like,
sure.
there was a
No
couple other
hurry.
things that Tomberg talks about in the chapter. He talks about the Akasha Chronicle, the esoteric idea of the Akasha Chronicle, and
Oh, yeah. I had a guy get this.
Okay, go for it.
He was a genius, but he was a weird genius, right? And he was
They often are.
I mean, he was. He could just do stuff that it just blew my mind.
Yeah.
But he told me he could read in the Akasha Chronicle. And then he told me that I was the reincarnation of Edward Bulwer Lytton, who wrote Zanoni, the Rosicrucian Table, but also was responsible for It Was a Dark Stormy Night, right? And he told me my wife was Edward Casey. Was that his name?
Oh, Edward Casey, yeah.
Edward Casey. And I'm like, yeah, right. But it's interesting when he talks about
Excuse me.
and I was just thinking about this when we were reading just a second ago, Nate. Because when he's talking about apokatastasis, right? Because he gets there, and I even wrote there, it's on page 576.
Oh yeah, where he talks about origin.
No, when he talks, where'd it go? Because I wrote there.
He explicitly endorses
584.
Originism at one point too, though.
Yeah, he's talking about origin, right? He says, "Is there in the world any person or group or people who know that with certain knowledge who will be impenitent in the distant future? And two, is there any world or any and is there in the world any person or group of people who have the authority to specify the limits of God's love and mercy, to state and decree that the love of God goes so far and no further?" And I wrote long ago. I wrote in the margin there, dude, right?
Yeah, yeah, right. Yeah.
And this is what I don't know if you noticed this too, but
That's kind of like did you see the conversation I had with Paul Vanderklay about hell? Because this is like Tomberg's position here is very similar to the one that I tried to stake out, which is like, look, it's like I'm just saying that it is wrong to consider universalism a heresy, and it is wrong to act as if infernalism were established doctrine. Because that's not what we actually have.
Where was Paul with that?
It was
the Calvinist.
He was. Well, you have to watch the conversation and see. I think it was very amicable.
This is how marketing works, people. This guy right here.
What was that?
That's how marketing works. This guy right here.
Yeah.
Watch the conversation and find out.
Watch the conversation and find out. Yeah, exactly. So,
he was like and subscribe.
I mean, he didn't full on agree with me, but it was like I think he could see the point I was making.
Oh, he just liked he liked the fact that it was up in the air, right?
But I noticed this actually when I was working on.
I think he appreciated the fact that I didn't just full on attack him.
Yeah. But it was up in the air. Yeah.
But isn't it interesting how I don't care what you do with Sophiology, you look through the history of Sophiology, they always get to universalism. It always gets there.
Well, why? Because
Sophia got there, Bulgakov got there.
Yeah.
The Philadelphians got there.
Yeah.
This is this is really not that surprising because
it restores purgatory.
Yeah.
It restores a rightful understanding of purgatory.
It also kind of tends
it's implied, but the thing is that purgatory is not part of Orthodox theology, right? But there you go. And this is why I think later, what's his name, Seraphim Rose tried to introduce the idea of the toll houses.
The toll houses for the dead, yeah.
And I have an
doesn't that have an older origin than that, doesn't it?
Maybe. Well, it really got going with him.
I know David Bentley Hart hates it.
I
I know
know.
that.
And so does this priest. I know he's an Orthodox priest, Father Stephen. He's one of the funniest people I've ever met. And he baptized my brother-in-law and his wife when they came into the Orthodox Church. And he, as a as a baptism gift, he gave him a he made it. He made it. It was a box of Toll House cookies, but but he changed the cover. It's like Father Seraphim Rose Toll House cookies.
That's hilarious. Oh my goodness. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what do we think what do we think about what Tomberg says about the Akasha Chronicle here? He says there's not just one, first of all. He says it's like there are actually three.
Yes.
And the one that your friend was claiming to access would be like the Akasha Chronicle, that is like all the layer of facts, which I think it's, given the way he talks about memory throughout this, it's like you can think of it as the cosmic automatic memory, right? Because like the way he talks about these chronicles, three different chronicles, you can map on the types of like the automatic, logical, and moral memory onto these different versions of the chronicle. It's interesting that like the part that he says about like I don't what is it, Fabre whatever, I don't know.
Dolivet?
What was that? Yeah, Dolivet, yeah, like and Steiner and people who like were like claiming to access the Akasha. He implies both that their work has value and merit and that they were making it up at the same time, it seems to me.
Improvisation,
yeah. So it's like,
but that's what
they're making it up but don't think that it doesn't matter, essentially, is what he's saying.
Yeah, and that's the one thing I could never hang with that crowd, is when they talk about karma. And in fact, a few months ago, I spoke at the Theosophical Society in Detroit. I think it was on Meditations on the Tarot, as a matter of fact. Yeah. And someone was trying to rip into me about Christianity and karma. I said, well, but we're here to learn lessons, she said, and if we don't learn it, we keep repeating the same mistakes. I said, well, yeah, we're great, but how are you going to know it, because you don't know it?
Right.
In here, and if it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. I mean, I do believe that reincarnation is a thing, but when people talk about this karma thing, like you're getting back here to be punished for sins you can't remember, come on, that doesn't even make any sense.
Okay, so let me finish that then, because this is what he says about the third Akasha Chronicle. He says, and it is the third Akasha Chronicle, or the Book of Life, which is the essence of karma. Since the incarnation of Christ, karma has become the affair of the Lord of karma, who is Jesus Christ.
Right.
For Jesus Christ not only preached the new law, which must replace the old law of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, but also realized it on a cosmic level by elevating the Book of Life above the Book of Accounts of strict justice. Right. Karma is therefore no more the law of cause and effect solely, which works from incarnation to incarnation. It is now, above all, the means of salvation, i.e., the means of effecting new inscriptions in the Book of Life and effacing other inscriptions from it.
Yeah.
So, all right. So I think we covered like pretty much every major concept that he deals with in this chapter, and we had some interesting sidelines that I think were very productive. And what do we do when we run out of words?
Sing.
Play the guitar.
That's right. All right. Thank you for joining me today.
Take care.
Appreciate it.